All right, so we've been going through all these, and we're going to continue to do this, go through them. The first one, obviously, the BNSF, and we've gone through the Santa Fe, the Burlington, the Great Northern. Now we're going to do the Northern Pacific. Do you see a steam
There
engine?
we go.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, here's a typical Northern Pacific engine: red roof, big cab, high domes. So they have and this is a switch engine, so they have to be able to put sand when it reverses and sand when it's going forward. So they have a sand dome here and a sand dome here, and here's the steam dome with the pop valve on top, the bell, and then they also the NP like big, huge stacks, tall and bigger in diameter than most railroads would put on. They also had the headlight up here on top, and they painted the smoke box graphite colored. Now this doesn't look very big, but it could move a lot of cars because all of the weight is on these three little drivers, or six drivers, 6 wheels, and all the weight is there. It can't go very fast, and you wouldn't want to go very fast because it doesn't have a leading truck or a trailing truck, but it could move a lot of cars slowly. So then we'll look at the this is an early picture, 1900, when they formed started the North Coast Limited. That goes back that far. And it was a very regular train, but it stopped at a lot of places, stopped at almost every place, and they had a lot more towns to go to than the Great Northern did because they were built early. And so that's a picture from 1900. Here's another typical. This is a consolidation. Again, big chimney, high domes, and a
Big light.
up on top of the smoke box.
And I love that building past it there.
Yeah, that's a cool depot someplace.
I like it.
And then they bought a lot of Mikados, like the Great Northern and some of the other railroads did. This is an early one. They had, I think, 5 classes, but again, big chimney here, or stack, smokestack. And you can see a spoked wheel back here in the trailing truck, big wheel. And later they made a smaller wheel, and they would put an outside bearing that they could actually reach. These inside bearings were kind of difficult to work with. And then here's a 10-wheeler that 460, and same kind of characteristics. This is over at Como Shops in St. Paul, probably early in the 1900s. And then the NP, one of the big things they did is they asked Alco and Baldwin to build them 484s, and that became the Northern type because NP was the first to build them. A big, huge steam locomotive that they could haul the passenger trains with, the North Coast and the Main Streeter and some of their other ones. They're huge engines, and they ended up with 5 classes of them, and they ran a long time. And then after the diesels came in for the steam engines, they ran them in freight for years, right up until almost until 1960. But now, of course, this is the Northern, and for railroads like the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis, they couldn't call it a Northern, so they called it a Dixie. And then, of course, the RF&P, Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac, they called them Presidents, and the New York Central called them Niagaras. So, but most of the railroad called them Northern. That was kind of the name that stuck because of the NP. The other big groundbreaking locomotive they got was this is the Yellowstone, and at the time it was built in the late 20s, early 30s. It was the largest steam locomotive ever built. It's a 2884, and they'd been building. They had some articulateds, but this thing was a monster. And it was the largest firebox in grate they'd ever produced, and it was because it was burning lignite coal, which has about half the heat content of bituminous. So they had to have twice as big a firebox. And interestingly, this thing was not built for the mountains. It was built for the hill and dale land across North Dakota and Montana, because the NP, like the Milwaukee, was crossing rivers. And when you cross rivers, that means you're on top of a bluff, and then you have to go down in the valley, and
Cross.
then you have to come back up. And so you're going up and down and up and down, and they were trying to, they had to run 2 Mikados. Well, then they said, well, let's build a big locomotive where one engineer is controlling the whole thing. And so they did. And these things were Yellowstones because the Northern Pacific was the Yellowstone Park Line. That was their name.
Right. Yeah.
And so here's another picture. These are from the internet. And here's one cooking along in eastern Montana. They're big locomotives. So then the diesels started coming in, and of course, again, the Northern Pacific was very conservative. If you think about the Great Northern, I mean, that's a pretty flashy paint scheme. That's the Empire Builder when they first built in 1947 with a couple of E units on it, orange and green, and many people consider this one of the most attractive of all the 1950s paint schemes. But the NP was pretty conservative, so they had this pine tree up front because they knew they had to have something light color, because otherwise people wouldn't be seeing them at the grade crossing. So this thing is actually kind of a symbolic pine tree, but it was dark green, and they had a green band going down the side. But it was, so here's the North Coast. It took 11 hours longer than the Great Northern Empire Builder. 11 hours longer. And so it stopped at a lot of places, didn't have a full diner and everything. So, in the late 40s and the early 50s, NP was getting killed because the Empire Builder was doing so much better. So they hired Raymond Loewy, who apparently he was a big designer. He helped finish the GG1, and he did all sorts of things, from toasters to lamps and everything. But he was a good designer, and he went out. And the story I heard was that he sat on a bluff along the Yellowstone River out there someplace, and he just sat there all day, and he tried different things. And finally, and it was apparently early in the spring, and he's got this light green, which is said to be the color of the water coming off a glacier, and the dark green are the spruce trees, and then white for snow. And many people consider this the most elegant passenger train.
Yeah.
So, so I took this one in 1969. This is over right where they were going to build the Minnesota 280 bridge. So these are all the elevators right in front of the University of Minnesota's over here. He's going, this is the main streeter going between Minneapolis and St. Paul. And this is the Great Northern Passenger Main. And he was probably doing 50 or 60 miles an hour. They moved right along between the two cities. And then their freight was pretty conservative scheme. It was black with again the pine tree up here, and then they did the same thing on the those black units, but they did paint the ends yellow for collision protection. I took this picture in 1969, and it was at Northtown Yard, and you can see still almost all boxcars. They were still using. I was surprised there weren't more modern boxcars, but railroad's a capital intensive business. So, but initially they would always keep the Northern Pacific was pretty conservative. They had a lot of F units, and they would keep all the F units together. They kept all the GP9s together and the RS3s together. But as the late 60s, they started mixing stuff up. And so this is a GP9, this is an F7B, and that's an Alco RS3, and they're heading west with a drag freight out of Northtown. And here's a picture of a I think it's probably either the main street or maybe a train coming down from Duluth in 1970. The guys are already starting to take the heralds off, and there's a Great Northern car in here and stuff like that. This is up north of Northtown, and here he's pulling away. This is why one of we have problems with digital, but even with Kodachrome, you had problems back in the day. This is one of the better rolls I ever took. And I
Ooh.
sent it to Kodak, and it came back, and I don't know what happened. The film stalled, and the operator running the machine didn't. Anyway, there's amoeba all over because obviously the developer didn't dried on the film.
Yeah.
But I kept the picture anyway because it's
Sure.
it's of historical significance. So here's a freight train coming in with an F7, an F3B, and an F7B, and they've taken the herald off. And here's a picture of the Main Streeter coming in, again with the amoeba on it. So here's a picture of the internet from the internet of the North Coast Limited. And they added.
I can remember those kinds of things happening, developing black and white film.
Oh yeah. It's it was
the film sticks to itself in the tank, and
yeah. Oh yes. And Kodachrome was a very complicated process, actually. In retrospect, I was surprised because they had to start development, and then they had to shine a light on it to reverse it, because otherwise it would come out negative. And it was a color reversal film, and then they had to add 3 dye layers, and but that's why a picture like this, I'm sure, was Kodachrome, because that's 1969, and look at it, there's not a bit of fading or anything. So the NP also, during the war, because the War Production Board had told General Motors, you're just going to build FTs and F units and E units. You're going to build freight and passenger units, because they weren't very successful. And so they told Baldwin and Alco, because of course all 3 manufacturers are making a lot of war material. But they told them you can build switch engines. And so Alco and NP, Great Northern, bought some of their switch engines. And then this is an S2, and you can tell that because it has the big radiator here, and it has the blunt trucks. And I don't know if you ever heard one of these S2s or S1s going by, but it sounds like it's coming apart. They would clang and bang and everything. It was unbelievable. They go over a switch and you'd swear the truck was falling apart, because I don't know why, but that was their design, and it was the only engines that ever had them. So they obviously weren't too successful. On the S3 and S4, they went to the standard AAR, the American Association of Railroads Type A truck. And this is the Baldwin they bought.